sure that we spend enough time on the structure of the levered beta core to make sure that people understand what's going on there. Because I actually had a lengthy email exchange with someone I consider to be a highly sophisticated investor who ended up not really understanding about the mechanics of how NTSX works. For example, he thought that if the equity sleeve declined, then the portfolio would be overly exposed to treasuries, and didn't understand that there was going to be some notional rebalancing to keep the 90-60 equity treasury ratio intact along the way, right? So, Corey, I think you've maybe done the most digging on the underlying mechanics of that. So maybe would you mind just going through what's happening in that portfolio?
Sure. So NTSX specifically, you can think of it's an ETF, right? And they're going to take 90% of the money invested and invest in the S&P 500. So as an ETF, you get all the wonderful theoretical tax benefits of buying the underlying equities and in the US at least, the ability to wash out a lot of the taxable turnover that's happening in that passive exposure. And then the remaining 10% is being used to buy a ladder of treasury futures. So 12.5% in 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year. So equal notional amounts. And then the fund is being managed, and I'm going to use air quotes for those who are just listening, I'm going to say actively, to maintain a 5% tolerance band around that 90-60. So when you get drift, so right now, for example, interest rates have been going up, treasury futures have been declining in value every day. Some of that cash is being swept out of the collateral amount. You're going to see a move away from that 90-60. Maybe right now it's more like 95-55. And at that point, that's going to trigger a rebalance when it gets there to sell down some equity, buy back some treasuries to get back to a 90-60. And conversely, let's say it's March 2020, equities crash and bonds go up. Well, what it's going to do is it's going to start selling bonds to buy equities, right? Because it's, again, drifting away from that 90-60 exposure. So it's just like a 60-40 in the very same way that when those weights get out of whack, it's just going to rebalance. I think we get confused by the treasuries, but I think if you just think of this as a 60-40, that's just more, the logic makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, 1.5 times the 60-40, right? So when you allocate 2/3 of your capital to the 90-60, you end up with a full allocation to what is the equivalent effectively of the Vanguard Balance Fund. And it, just like the Vanguard Balance Fund maintains its relative exposures to stocks and bonds, this fund also maintains its relative exposures to stocks and bonds within the bands that you described, right? So you're maintaining that 60-40 quality throughout the cycle, which I think is critical.
I think the key difference, right, between something like this and the Vanguard Balance Fund is Vanguard Balance Fund is going to buy the total bond market, right? It's not just U.S. Treasuries, and it's not going to be in this notionally equivalent ladder across the yield curve. It's going to have asset-backed securities. It's going to have credit in there. It's going to have agency bonds. So a little bit of a different risk profile. But again, in the paper, we show 66 cents in an NTSX replicating portfolio versus the Vanguard Balance Fund, and they are incredibly close.
And you're not able to benefit. I mean, the benefit of futures too is you get this roll yield, right?
Yeah. Right.
Which is a nice little extra boost. And at the moment, this roll yield is competitive with investment grade credit spreads.
And potentially tax advantage in the Treasury futures versus holding corporates. This is something people don't necessarily know, is that Treasury futures are taxed at a 60% long-term, 40% short-term rate versus most of your return in something like the Barclays aggregate is going to come from your income and the income distributions. And so there can be tax benefits to implementing your bond exposure with futures.